Chapter 11. The Mysteries of Time. Most of us like to celebrate our birthdays. My own, for example, is a national holiday in Tibet, a day of gladness and rejoicing in Upper Sumatra, and, no doubt, many other parts of the world. But how many have ever stopped to consider this particular riddle? If you are born on a Monday, then the next year your birthday will fall on a Tuesday, the next on a Wednesday, and so on and so forth. Therefore, by the time you are 7, although your birthday remains the same, you must actually be celebrating your birthday 1 week later in the year. By the time you are 30, an entire lunar month later, therefore, a man born in the spring must surely celebrate his 19th birthday in the middle of the summer. This is what you call a cosmic mystery, and I will return to it. There is a great deal more to time than meets the eye, or has, in fact, ever been explained by that unprincipled scoundrel, A. Einstein Esquire. For instance, who amongst us has not said at one time or another, "Doesn't time fly when you're enjoying yourself?" Time really drags in this job. Not bloody Christmas again already. My wife says I'm a bad lover. How can any woman tell that in 30 seconds? Isn't that the window cleaner coming more often than he did last year? Now, I'm the last man on earth to cry conspiracy, but I think to detect the acrid stench of its breath than this one. Allow me to explain. Time, as you will agree, is the most valuable commodity that we possess, and as we know only too well, every really valuable commodity falls sooner or later into the hands of some unscrupulous individual who then exploits it for their own ends. It is my contention that time is now under the control of such an individual who manipulates it in order to down the working man. Allow me to explain further. The average working man spends roughly half his life working. This involves a lot of clock watching. The working part of the working man's life seems to last forever. Then, if he survives this and retires, one of two things happens. Either he finds time dragging terribly and returns to work, or he resists this urge, takes off to the seaside, wakes up one morning, says 20 years retired, seems like only 5 minutes, and drops dead. There is no escape for the working man. His time is being controlled. Let me cite the example of Shakespeare. How could he have completed so many plays, as well as formulating the beer which bears his name, and opening so many tea rooms? Remember, there were no typewriters or photocopier machines in those days. If Shakespeare wrote a play with a cast of 25, then he must have had to write a separate copy for each of the cast. I estimate that he must therefore have penned no less than 5,000 words per minute, 10 hours a day for 20 years. No mean feat. There are two possibilities here. Either that time was substantially different in those days, let's say that a minute then would be equivalent to an hour and a half now, or that somehow Shakespeare had time on his side, under his control, in fact. Oh yes, I contend that it was all down to Shakespeare's employer. He had control of Shakespeare's time, and was determined to milk it for every ounce of potential profit. So, I hear you cry, tell us how it's done, Hugo, and tell us who is doing it. And so I shall. The Pope controls time on this planet. Come, I hear you cry. Surely this is sour grapes, Hugo, because your application to become Pope has been turned down yet again. Not so, my friends, not so. I will now explain everything. A Brief History of Time by Hugo Rune. No one knows exactly who originally discovered the existence of time, but it was certainly the Romans who first thought of splitting it up into units of measurement. The Roman Senate started off with seconds and decided that 60 of them should equal 1 minute. Being extremely fond of naming things, especially after themselves, the 60-man Senate arrived at this particular figure without much in the way of heated debate, and each had a second name after themselves. They did not, however, agree upon a uniform length for the second, and since some senators had much longer names than others, jealousy soon arose. In no time, senators were renaming themselves with longer and longer titles, so that their seconds should be bigger than everyone else's. We have the 61st senator to thank for the length of the second, arriving back, as he did from his holidays, to discover that his honourable companions hadn't given him a second to call his own. He took umbrage, a small town near Troy. Humour. And being a conniving little toady with an eye for the main chance, he proclaimed that the second should equal exactly the time it took to say "Praise Caesar," and that they shouldn't have names at all, but simply be numbered from 1 to 60. This didn't go down very well with the rest of the Senate, but found great favour with Caesar, who allowed the 61st senator to keep umbrage. The Caesar in question was the most almost forgotten Flavius the Noseless, and it was he who originally decreed that all Roman sculptures should be fashioned without noses, a fact which seems to have slipped by the greybeards of the art world, the same greybeards, in fact, who still refer to Henry Moore as an abstract sculptor. I knew Moore for many years, and could testify he was a master of lifelike representation. He just knocked around with some very funny-looking women. But I digress. Now the Senate, having got time divided up, named and tamed, were not happy. They had already invented the class system, we have much to thank the Romans for, and they were saying to themselves, why should time be the same for everyone? Surely we, as the ruling intelligentsia, should have harsher time than the slaves and plebs. A whole lot of serious debating went on about this. Many suggestions were put forward that the plebs should have less seconds in their minutes, that they should have the same number of seconds but be taxed for using them, that somehow their seconds should be made longer so they could do more work in a day. It was the latter suggestion, and how it was put into practice, that has enslaved the working man to this day. Now, there was this Greek fellow called Archimedes, who had built up quite a reputation for himself. He had invented this world called Eureka, which, if shouted under certain conditions in the bathroom, enabled him to solve any manner of obtuse conundrums. Flavius the Noseless had booked 2 weeks in Greece for his holidays, so whilst he was there, he dropped in on Archimedes and asked if he could come up with anything. Archimedes stroked his beard and retired to cogitate. Eventually, he emerged from his bath, somewhat prune-like about the toe regions, but with the E word once more on his lips. The answer lies in the soap, he told Caesar.
Kindly explain,
said the noiseless one. Certainly, now the way I see it, you want a more upmarket variety of time than the plebs. Now I must make this quite clear to you. You can't actually mess around with time, but you can mess around with the perception of time. What you need is a special drug, which when administered to the plebs will alter the way they perceive time. It will make them appear to travel slower. Thus, whilst in this state, they will get much more work done than they would normally. Do you know anything about chemistry? Caesar nodded sagely. Thought not, thought Archimedes. Well, I happen to know of such a drug. It has a very complicated chemical formula. It's C11H17NO3, and I alone can manufacture it. All you have to do is introduce it into the pleb soap. They wash with the soap and ingest the drug, and away they go.
But what about the great unwashed?
Caesar asked. Stick it in their tea, agreed the working masses, may not bathe as regularly as might be wished, but they all drink tea. Listen, I'll distill you a batch. You take it back to Rome, if you're happy with the results, put it in a regular order, and we're in business. Palms were spat upon and smacked together, and the rest, as they say, is history. Caesar returned to Rome, tested the drug, found it worked magnificently. Rome thrived. Caesar, being an astute businessman, if not a terribly nice person, attacked Greece, arrested Archimedes, and tortured the formula out of him. The Caesars eventually turned to Christianity and became popes, and the Vatican has held the secret to this very day. Hang about, I hear you cry, doubting Toms that you are. This doesn't ring true. Surely we all use soap and drink tea. We can't all be permanently drugged. No, say I, not all, because not all tea and soap is infected. And if only the Vatican were in on the conspiracy, it would never operate. The manufacturers of tea and soap are in collusion. The distributors are in collusion. Higher management is in collusion. All those who drink exotic tea and smell differently from the rest of us are probably all in collusion. It is an international conspiracy, huge and insidious, and the Pope is behind it all. I detect that some doubts still remain, that you will really believe that you could not possibly be a victim of this terrible conspiracy. But consider this. Time really flies when you're enjoying yourself. This is because alcohol negates the effects of the drug. Ever found time flying when you're taking a bath or drinking a cup of tea? Aha! And let me mention this. The drug is addictive. Ever found yourself dying for a cuppa? Ever wondered why the Catholic Church was so keen to convert the natives of South America? You know South America, where all that coffee comes from. Ever wondered why the formula for Coca-Cola is such a closely guarded secret? I could continue at great length, but I will not. I opened this piece by stating that your birthday falls upon a different day each year, but that logically it could not. Ever heard the expression, he's so stoned he doesn't know what day of the week it is? In concluding, I would just like to say that it's been a very great honour to be invited here tonight to the William of Orange Memorial Hall, Belfast, as guest speaker at the Protestant Shopkeeper of the Year Awards. To find myself in the company of so many eminent, discerning, and open-minded independent shopkeepers affords me pleasure beyond expression. I trust that my revelations have amused you. I know they will draw upon considerable interest from the buying public when they are revealed upon the front pages of certain newspapers this coming Sunday. Considerable interest. You will notice that I have before me a selection of Rune brand products. For instance, Old Rune. Now, this particular tea is guaranteed 100% C11H17NO3 free. Organically grown, packed in an ozone-friendly biodegradable carton and marketed at a price to please both shopkeeper and purchaser alike, as with Cafe Rune Golden Blend, Hugo Cola, and Rune Light Soap. Now, I have to knock these out by the case, so who'll be the first one up? You, sir, the tall, distinguished gentleman? 12 cases of Old Rune, certainly. Rizla, fetch 12 down from the back of the van. Offered as Exhibit A for the prosecution in the case of Nearly Everyone versus Hugo Rune. The smell of frying bacon awoke Cornelius Murphy from an erotic dream about a barmaid with violet eyes. He climbed from the bed and shambled over to the dressing-table mirror. There were no signs of a 5 o'clock shadow. His hair had formed itself into an interesting anthill kind of a shape, though. Cornelius drew the curtains and gazed out upon the day. The village below looked pretty charming, if you like that sort of thing. Cornelius wondered whether he did. No, I don't, he decided. Tuppe awoke with a shout and leapt from the portmanteau. Something wrong, Tuppe? Tuppe shook his head. But James, that's all. Again now and then. James, there's this big black bag full of horrible squirming things, and it's tied to my heels like a shadow, and I can't get away. Horrible. Sans it. No, horrible. Really horrible. Horrible, yes. Your pyjamas, said Tuppe. Really, really horrible. In the back kitchen of the Hangman's Arms, Milk and Moloch, a young man's dream, stood over the frying pan. Hello, she said, making eyes at Cornelius. I thought you might have stopped by my room last night. I were real lonely. Cornelius groaned and bit his lip. You win some, you lose some, whispered Tuppe. You missed all the excitement. Evidently, Cornelius hung his head. His head hung its hair. No, down in the bar, we had a spontaneous human combustion. Oh, bother, said Tuppe. I've always wanted to see one of those. Third one this week. The barmaid broke eggs into the pan. Do you have any mushrooms? Tuppe asked. Sure do, little manny. I'll stir them in. Chat to crispy were. I had to scrape him off the flagstones with this here spatula. She raised the utensil in question from the frying pan. Toast and marmalade for myself, I think, said Cornelius. A light eater, me. An ancient black Volkswagen covered with vicious spikes and fitted with all black windows slipped out from a back street lock-up in Sheila Nagy. At the wheels sat Hamish, in the back seats Angus and Sawney, in the front passenger seat the Campbell. The Campbell's all-black window swished down and evil Jim stuck out his head. He sniffed the air. South, he said. Cornelius chewed upon cold, dry toast and watched in disgust as Tuppe tucked into a fry-up of suitably epic proportions. Have you got muesli? Cornelius asked the barmaid. How dare you? The barmaid took a swing at him with the dreaded spatula. It's a breakfast cereal, the tall and ducking boy explained. It's full of nuts and bran and raisins and healthy things like that. Well, no, the barmaid returned to her cooking. No call for stuff like that round here. Surely there must be somewhere I could buy some. A present for my mum. Well, there'd be Molly's. She sells healthy things. Local family business. Cornelius chewed upon his toast. No, she's from the south. No one ever goes into her shop. That fancy food, for the swells, that is. Tourists. And you get a lot of those. No, none. The barmaid raised the spatula and brought it down upon a blue bottle. Tuppe flinched, but continued to fill his face. Is Molly's far from here? Cornelius watched as the barmaid scooped up the blue bottle with a spatula, flipped it into the air and battered it through the open window. Out the front, turn left and first on your left. More bacon, little manny. Yes, please, said Tuppe. Out the front, turn left and first on the left. Cornelius gazed in through the front window of Molly's Whole Foods. Tuppe gazed up at the crumbling facade. Hooks, somewhat gone to seed. She must know something. Shall we investigate? Lead on, Mr. Murphy. Cornelius pushed open the door. The door went creak and groan, and a little cracked bell went clink. It smells in here, Tuppe remarked. Cornelius perused the premises. Cobwebs clung to every corner. Dust put the shelved stock out of focus. What light struggled through the unwashed front window soon gave up the ghost in the air that seemed almost palpably grey. Cornelius plucked an apple from a basket on the lower counter. He stroked the dust away with his thumb. The apple crumbled away to dust in his hand. "Hello," called Cornelius. "Is there anybody there?" Something rustled at the rear of the shop, the sound as of dry leaves being crushed together. A thin, reedy little voice asked,
"Who is it?"
"A customer," Cornelius replied. "Good morning to you."
"I don't want any customers. Bugger off."
Cornelius peered into the gloom. A patch of darkness in a far corner seemed somewhat darker than the less dark darkness that surrounded it, so to speak. "Are you Molly Hartog?"
"Who knows my name?"
The little dark patch of slightly darker darkness shrank back to merge quite convincingly with the less dark darkness and form an overall dark sort of an area, all in one place. "My name is Murphy."
"Audie Murphy, America's most decorated hero of the Second World War, star of Hell Guns of Glory Beach."
The little dark patch sank deeper into the surrounding darkness. Visually, the change was too subtle to attract much notice, already in fact. "His name is Cornelius Murphy," Tuppe said, "and he is the stuff of epics." The little, now indistinguishable dark patch gave a jump and then moved slowly forward into the uncertain light. Here it became an uncertainly illuminated little dark patch. A very little uncertainly illuminated little dark patch. It reached out a tiny hand, encased in black silk. Tuppe took the hand between his own and kissed it.
"Little Manny,"
said Molly Hartog,
"what is Tippereth together?"
"He is the son and not the servant."
"And whither comes the wind?"
"From the east, and we withal."
"Good, good. You may walk with me then."
The tiny woman took Tuppe by the hand and led him into the darkness at the rear of the shop. Cornelius stared on in wonder. "Don't lag," called Tuppe, "and best mind yourself." Clunk went the head of Cornelius Murphy. Cornelius sat, uncomfortably doubled up, in a sitting room of meagre dimensions. The ceiling was scarcely 4 feet above the floor, which was for the most part occupied by his legs. The little woman was brewing tea at a toy stove by the window. She appeared as a Victorian doll, curiously animated, her tiny pinched face of sculpted wax. "What is all this wind from the east business?" Cornelius whispered. "Kinfolk." Tuppe shushed him to silence. "Let me speak to her. Give me the photograph." Cornelius gave Tuppe the photograph.
"Travelling stock, your people?"
The Victorian doll filled a teapot and covered it with an egg cosy. Tuppe nodded. "Before times fell away. My grandfather was with Toomey for a spell, and with Wombwell, Polgar and Tom Norman."
"The Silver King? I knew them all, and I'll know you too. Let me have a squint."
She perched a pair of ivory-framed pince-nez onto her sparrow's beak of a nose and peered through them.
Oh, she crowed, "you're a top."
"I am that, but I don't know the Hartog clan."
"But I knew your pa well enough. Him and his porker pigs. He skipped out when they sent old Polgar to the chokey, eh?"
"That was him right enough, and that was him done with travelling life."
"All gone now."
Molly turned away to pour tea. She stepped onto the tall boy's left ankle. Cornelius bit his lip.
"What do you want from me, Tuppe?"
"Hugo Rune," said Tuppe. "You knew him."
"Poor dear Hugo. I knew him well. He reinvented the ocarina, you know. Oh, how he hated Bud Abbott."
"He left some papers, I believe."
"Papers? Piles and piles of them. He was a genius, a master. Years before his time. Decades. This world wasn't big enough to hold Hugo Rune."
"These papers, were they part of a manuscript?" Tuppe accepted a teacup the size of a shrunken thimble. "Thanks," said he.
"Part of a book."
Molly passed a cup to Cornelius, who perched it on the palm of his hand and gaped at it in awe.
The book of ultimate truths. Such knowledge the master had, such wisdom, such genius, such an appetite. Barred from every Chinese noodle parlour in West London he was."
"Why was that?"
"Due to his allergy."
The miniature woman seated herself on Murphy's left foot. Cornelius marvelled anew. Now she was apparently without weight. "He was allergic to noodles." Tuppe sipped his tea.
"No. Money. Couldn't bear to have it anywhere near him. Broke out in a sweat at the very sight of it, or the mention. So there was always trouble when someone presented him with a bill. He offered the world his genius. All he asked in return was that the world should cover his expenses, meagre as they were."
Tuppe raised an eyebrow to Cornelius, who was raising one of his own. And the world wasn't keen?
Conspiracies all around. Petty men seeking to do him down, to steal his knowledge and use it for their own wicked ends.
About the papers, do you have them? Tuppe finished his tea.
No.
Molly shook her head. Golden motes drifted from it and hung in the air.
Not I. Perhaps Victor.
Victor Zenobia?
Poor dear Victor.
Victor's dead, I'm afraid.
Oh.
Molly bowed her head.
Then there are few enough of us left to the cause.
These men. Tuppe handed the photograph to Molly. The little woman gazed at it through her pince-nez.
So long ago. There is Victor and the master, of course. The silly sod that took the photo didn't get me in. He made a right fuss about not getting his fee, if I recall.
The others in the picture, who are they?
Molly pointed. That is Risler and the other Joseph.
Might one of them have the papers?
One of them must. Victor was the master's accountant, Joseph his chauffeur, and Risler his magical son.
Do you know where Joseph or Risler might be now?
Why do you want the master's papers, young Tuppe?
To publish them in their entirety.
Publish them?
Molly toppled from the tall boy's foot and collapsed onto the floor. Tuppe hastened to help her up.
Publish...
Molly cackled to herself.
You can't publish them. No publisher would dare publish them. Or even if they did, oh, no, it couldn't be done.
Why not?
If you had read the papers, then you would know.
Tell me, Molly, Joseph and Risler, where are they now?
Won't do you any good. Even if they have the papers, they won't show them to you.
I could at least ask them.
As you will. All right. Perhaps and perhaps. You have come to ask, and so I must tell you. Risler took holy orders. You will find him at the monastery of St. Sacco Benedetto.
And Joseph?
Joseph.
The small woman spat.
He's in London. Calls himself Jack something or other. A big noise in the record industry, whatever that is.
Cornelius stuffed things into his suitcase. He and Tuppe were now back in their bedroom at the Hangman's Arms. Well, said Tuppe, what did you make of Molly? I think I'll give her muesli a miss. So, Tuppe sat on the portmanteau, kicking his heels. What do you propose we do next? We shall visit Brother Risler at the monastery, but before we do, I must call Mr. Kobold, tell him what I have found out, and have him send some more money. You nip off then, I'll finish packing. Thank you, Tuppe. Stick all the papers in the rucksack. We'll leave the portmanteau behind. I'll go downstairs and call Mr. Kobold. They're bound to have a phone in the bar. They didn't. In fact, they didn't have a phone anywhere in the village. Never needed one, the beautiful barmaid explained, as Cornelius settled up for the bread and board. Tuppe struggled down the stairs with the luggage. I'll tell you what, though, the barmaid went on. I've been thinking about what you were saying, and I'd quite like to bury your children. Cornelius looked at Tuppe. Tuppe looked at Cornelius. I'll go and see if I can arrange some transport, said Tuppe. I might be some time. Milcom Murlock didn't boast a taxi service, but a nice undertaker with a very smart 1950s hearse agreed to take them to the next town. Cornelius waved through the back window. The beautiful barmaid waved down from an upstairs window. The hearse drove away. Did you get a receipt? Tuppe asked. Yes, thank you. Cornelius was grinning in a manner which was quite difficult to describe. An hour and a bit later, the hearse stopped in a town called Crumcrouk, which is just off the main Hebburn-under-Patunda bypass, 20 miles north of Triglav. Thanks very much. Cornelius waved to the departing hearse. Be lucky. Tuppe waved also. The hearse went back along the road for a bit and then rose into the sky and vanished into the clouds. There's something very suspicious about that hearse, said Cornelius. There certainly is, Tuppe agreed. It drove off with your suitcase. Crumcork wasn't much of a town to speak about. It lacked the bypass of Hebburn-under-Patunda, and Triglav certainly had the edge on it when it came to a southerly location. But it did have a garage, and it did have a telephone box, and both of these were to come in very handy. Cornelius took himself off to the telephone box. Tuppe hung around the garage. Presently Cornelius returned. How'd you get on? Tuppe asked. I spoke with Mr. Kobold. He seemed very agitated, kept saying to be careful. And what did you tell him? What I knew, about the papers in the portmanteau and Molly, and how I'm going on to the monastery next. What about Karaoke Jack? I didn't mention him. Anyway, Mr. Kobold suggested that I press on to Manchester tonight. Manchester? Where is that, do you think? We can look it up on the map. It's just outside Manchester, the place we want. The Holiday Inn, North Aimshire. First-class accommodation. I am assured of that. A room will be waiting and money will be in the post to arrive first thing tomorrow. Hats off to Arthur Kobold, said Tuppe, rubbing his hands together. By the by, Cornelius, do you know how to drive a car? Of course, the daddy taught me. But your daddy doesn't own a car. No, not as such, but a great lover of the automobile, the daddy. Every time some new one comes out on the market, he always calls up the maker and tells him about the small pulls when he's just had. But your daddy doesn't do the pulls. Cornelius raised an eyebrow. Quite so, said Tuppe. So you've got to try out a few of these nice new cars yourself? Exactly. I got the hang of it in the end. And you have a licence? Certainly. The daddy gave me his old one. Cornelius delved into a pocket and pulled it out. He said it would come in handy one of these days. Indeed. Tuppe smiled up at Cornelius. I'd like you to meet my new friend Mike. He's a mechanic. Get your motor running. The 1958 Cadillac Eldorado swept out from the garage and set off down the road from Cromcoe. Get out on the highway. Do you know what I am looking for? Cornelius asked. Adventure, Tuppe suggested. And whatever comes your way would be my guess. And what am I born to be? Wild, Cornelius. That is what you are born to be. Correct, my dear friend. Correct, Tuppe. This is a splendid car. I can't believe that Mike just let us drive it away. I think it was you telling about all those posh cars you test drive that really swung it. And we actually get paid for delivering it to this rich client in London. Cornelius stuck his elbow out of the window. Imagine that. Right place at the right time. Let's face it, you have to have an epic car if you're going on an epic journey. You certainly do. And this is one epic car. Electric blue paint job. Electric blue upholstery. Electric windows, said Tuppe. Electric sunroof. Electric lights, Cornelius suggested. Electric wireless set. Tuppe switched it on. You're a pink toothbrush, I'm a pink toothbrush, sang Max Bygraves. Electric toothbrush? Tuppe asked. A spiky black Volkswagen growled to a halt before the hangman's arms. The Campbells stepped from the car and sniffed the air. They've been here, he said. Hamish got out and speared a map onto a couple of bonnet spikes. And where is here, by the way? The Campbell examined the map. Right here, Milcom Moloch. Milcom Moloch! Hamish gazed about the place. Did someone nuke it or what? Little remained of Milcom Moloch. The hangman's arms was naught but a roofless ruin. The shells of shops and houses rose from scrubby grasslands. The road was gone into potholes. All was desolation and decay. There was a big storm, said the Campbell, like the one last night. 30 years ago, the village was cut off by floods. Then some Londoner drove in here, and they'd gone. The village was deserted, no trace. Food still on the tables, vanished off the face of the earth. Pop! The Campbell snapped his fingers. Hamish took off his war bonnet and scratched his head. I've never heard this story before. A whole village vanishes. Pop! Said the Campbell. Gone. Now go and search around. See what you can find. And you two, hurry up about it. Angus and Sawney slouched from the car. In the ruins of the hangman's arms they would find a green canvas portmanteau, a brush and comb set in a plastic case, and a duffel coat, lacking toggles, somewhere on the elbows. Hamish would take a shine to the duffel coat. Not half a mile along the road from the ruins of Milcom Moloch they would find the ruins of a burned-out taxicab, and a man with bandaged fingers and a blue complexion weeping over it. Hamish would take pity upon this sorry figure and give him the duffel coat to keep himself warm. Later in the day the taxi driver would be readmitted to the nearby hospital, this time in a state of shock and suffering from suspected rabies. He would insist to his dying day that an Arctic wolf had issued from the duffel coat and savaged him. He would also give up taxi driving and become a monk. I wouldn't fancy being a monk. Tuppe put his hands behind his head and smiled up at the passing sky. You go bolt too quickly. Cornelius smiled and drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. They shave their heads. It's called a tonsure, from the Latin tonsura, a shaving. Why? Tuppe made the electric window go up and down. Why do they do that? To signify their renunciation of the world and its vanities. Do leave the window alone, Tuppe. Tuppe left the window alone. His hand strayed to the cigarette lighter. Speak to me of tonsures, he said. Certainly. There are 3 types. Firstly, there's a tonsure of St. Paul. That's the entire head, mostly practised by the Eastern Church. Then there's the tonsure of St. Peter. That's the most common one, a circular patch on the crown of the head. And finally there's the tonsure of St. John. The front of the head is shaved on a line drawn from ear to ear. That was the ancient Celtic method, so it's sometimes called the Scottish or Irish tonsure. Do leave the cigarette lighter alone, Tuppe. Tuppe left the lighter alone. I wonder which method they favour at St. Sacco Benedito's, he wondered. Eyebrows and all, I expect. I understand that it is considered the most austere order in the country, really medieval. Tuppe twiddled the wireless dial. Things ain't what they used to be, yeah, sang Max Bygraves. The electric blue motor car with the high fins and the open top sailed over the crest of a hill and down the other side. The driver's hair followed close behind. The sun shone brightly down upon the epic travellers. Tuppe found a pair of really spiffing sunglasses in the glove compartment, and Cornelius put them on. And at precisely 12 o'clock the fan belt broke, and at precisely 5 minutes past 12 they were on their way again. Large kudos to you, dear friend, Cornelius told Tuppe, to have Mark the mechanic pack 3 spare fan belts. That is foresight indeed. Once bitten and things of that nature, smiled Tuppe. Cornelius slipped one of the spare fan belts on as a headband. I'll be able to see where I'm going a lot better now, he said. Much of it has been guesswork up till now. What? At a little after 1 of the sunny afternoon clock, they stopped at a vast motorway services area thingy. Here Cornelius fed the motor car with the best petrol that money could buy, and then took himself up to the restaurant to join Tuppe. The restaurant was a great long refectory of a place. A wall of windows overlooked the motorway. Ranks of formica-topped tables were besieged by steel chairs, which did not encourage a long stay. Tuppe sat dejectedly at a table by the door. No food lay spread before him. With a lunch? Cornelius asked. It's a self-service. I can't reach. How thoughtless of me. My apologies. Cornelius got in double rations and much ice cream. Tuppe set about the meal. You know, said he, between great chewings, I've never been in one of these places before, but I've seen them in the movies. There's usually a heavy metal man sitting in one corner, and their van's broken down, you see, and they're on their way to an important gig. And there's also this couple, deeply in love. Well, she is. He's going to go back to his wife. Cad, said Cornelius. Quite so. And there's a spy, and he often gets shot dead in the toilet. What? He gets shot dead more than once. Tuppe scooped beans into his mouth. Sorry, said Cornelius. Anyone else? There's us, of course, 2 young heroes on an epic journey. Anyone else? Tuppe glanced about the place. Apart from the 2 young heroes, the remaining cast of vast motorway services area, the movie, had yet to turn up. Tuppe did, however, spy out a lone figure at a distant table. There's him, said Tuppe, pointing past the tall boy's elbow. Cornelius turned and squinted. The sun blazed in and lit upon a large, broad-shouldered, shaven-headed man. He wore a plaid +4 suit and a silk cravat. Whilst his companion's back was turned, Tuppe swiped one of his sausages and thrust it into his mouth. Cornelius turned back. He looks familiar. Perhaps he's the spy. Where's my sausage gone? Tuppe suddenly spat stolen sausage all over Cornelius. Steady on. Cornelius flapped at himself. No need for that. It's only a sausage. I don't mind. No! Tuppe was coughing away like a mad thing. It's him! It's him! Who him? In the photo! Get out the photo! Cornelius pulled the late Victor Zenobia's snapshot from his top pocket. What? He made to have another look at the distant diner. It can't be. Don't look! Let me see the photo! Cornelius turned it to Tuppe. Tuppe gave it a squint and then took a peep past the tall boy's elbow. It is him, he whispered. Cornelius, it's Hugo Rune. A bloke you're talking about, said Mike the mechanic. Long tall bloke. You're all over the place. He was speaking to a bald-headed man who favoured a camouflage combat jacket to a +4 suit. What do you want with him, then? It's a private matter, said the Campbell. None of my business, then. Mike turned away, wiping his hands on an oily rag, the way only a real mechanic can. I would make it your business. The Campbell's hand fell upon Mike's left shoulder. It was a heavy hand with a good firm grip. Oh, aye. Mike turned and looked the Campbell up and down. He didn't very much like what he saw, and as for the 3 Highlanders lounging around the spiky Volkswagen, he prized away the hand which still gripped his shoulder. I need to know where he is travelling to. It's very important. He didn't say. Mike shrugged easily, but his right hand crept around to the rear pocket of his overall, where he kept the big Stilson spanner. Sorry I can't help you. I really must insist. The Campbell removed his broken spectacles and slipped them into his pocket. Look, piss off, will you? The spanner was out. The Campbell smiled at it, then smiled at Mike and stared deeply into his eyes. Then he leaned forward and whispered something into his left ear. The colour drained from the mechanic's face. His body began to tremble. The big spanner fell from his hand. "Where?" asked Campbell. "London," answered Mike in a cold, dead voice. "Somewhere else on the way, I think. He bought them up for me." "And?" "A monastery. St. Stack of Benedictors." "St. Stack of Benedictors. Well, there, that was easy, wasn't it? I generally take pleasure in a more subtle approach, but I really don't have the time right now. Thank you so much for your cooperation. You've been such a help." The Campbell leaned forwards once again and kissed Mike deeply upon the mouth. The mechanic wet his pants. Cornelius shuddered. "Are you all right?" Tuppe asked. "You're miles away. You're white as death." "Something just happened. Not here. Somewhere. Something bad." "This is very often the case. What about him?" Tuppe made furtive pointings. "It is him, just like the photograph." "It can't be." Cornelius gulped his coffee. "That picture was taken more than half a century ago." "Same suit," said Tuppe. "Same man, I'm telling you. Take a look. Go on." "You leave my last sausage alone, then." "I swear." Tuppe crossed his heart. Cornelius turned and took a good long look. The bald-headed man caught his stare and waggled his fingers in a friendly fashion. Cornelius smiled and turned back to Tuppe. Tuppe held up the photograph. He didn't speak. His mouth was full of stolen egg. The tall boy's head sank deeply into his chest. "Tuppe," he whispered through clenched teeth, "it's Hugo Rune. What are we going to do?" "We?" Tuppe swallowed. "You'd best go over there and pass the time of day. Ask him where he left the papers. I'll mind your lunch." "Oh no, we go together. You're in his epic too." "Okie dokie." Tuppe shinned down from his chair. Cornelius rose from his. "Come on in." The bald-headed man stared placidly towards them as they approached, and as he drew nearer, Cornelius became painfully aware of a curious buzzing sound in his ears, and of the fact that Hugo Rune appeared a mite indistinct about the edges. His great beringed fingers seemed to waver sometimes above and sometimes into the tabletop. There was something altogether untoward about the reinventor of the ocarina. Suddenly there was a whole lot of noise, commotion and hubbub, and a number of long-haired young men with leather jackets, tight trousers and snakeskin boots bustled into the restaurant. One of them carried a guitar case. Behind these came a weeping woman and a comforting man, and behind them a furtive-looking fellow with a briefcase. And suddenly Tuppe and Cornelius were in the thick of them. And when they no longer were, Hugo Rune had gone.